Hello and welcome to Inside Edition, where we discuss national, regional and international issues in depth. Intellectual property is a broad categorical description for the set of intangible assets owned and legally protected by a company or individual from outside use or implementation without consent. The concept of intellectual property relates to the fact that certain products of human intellect should be afforded the same protective rights that apply to physical property, which are called tangible assets. Most developed economies have legal measures in place to protect both forms of property. The Kingdom of Bahrain is firmly committed to enforce world-class intellectual property rights protection by various laws and regulations. To know more about that, we are pleased to be joined by the Assistant Professor of Intellectual Property Law at the University of Bahrain, Dr. Hanan Al-Mawla. Welcome back. Joining me here in the studio is Assistant Professor of Intellectual Property Law at the University of Bahrain, Dr. Hanan Al-Mawla. Thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Doctor, first of, can you give us an idea about the concept of intellectual property and the importance of its protection and why it's important for people to understand why it needs to be protected?
Okay, so the concept of intellectual property, it's basically a legal term that we use to refer to creations of the mind. So if you are a creative person, then you have, and the output is something that is creative, then you need legal protection. It is mainly designed around the notion of rewarding a creative person. So if you are creative, the law rewards you by giving you protection for your creations or for your creativity. Now, the concept of intellectual property is divided, or basically it covers main topics that include copyright, patents, utility models, industrial designs, and trademarks. This is just to simplify it. So if you are an author, if you're an inventor, if you're a business owner who uses a trademark, then you are protected through intellectual property.
Right. We talked about it a little bit before we went on air. Bahrain, the Kingdom of Bahrain actually has had laws and regulations put in for a very long time, but it was not common knowledge between people, and there is no proper understanding of it. So from your point of view, can you tell us more about these laws and regulations that are already in place?
Right. So first of all, it's important to clarify that we do not have a code that is titled Intellectual Property Code. So the topics of intellectual property are regulated into several or different legislations.
Right.
So we have a legislation that is concerned with the protection of authors' rights and neighboring rights, which is copyright. We have another law that is basically designed around the protection of patents and utility models, another one for industrial designs, and one for trademarks. The legislation concerned with the protection of trademarks is a unified law in the GCC states, so it applies in all GCC states except UAE for now. So we've had these laws for quite some time, obviously. Now, whether people know about it or not is another issue, because it has a lot to do with social awareness of the concept of intellectual property.
Right. Can you tell us more about what Bahrain's achievements are in terms of protecting intellectual properties compared to other countries in the region or even globally?
Right. I think it's important to understand that protection of IP is not something that can be achieved overnight. It has a lot to do with social awareness. It's mainly a culture. So you might have laws that protect IP, but yet protection is not, it's not really enforced that much. Not because the government is not doing its part, but rather because there is no social awareness. So we have laws that protect intellectual property. We meet the minimum, at least the minimum standards required by international agreements in all aspects. So the legal protection, when it comes to the legislative part, we have it. The enforcement part needs a bit more work, I would say, because this issue is not mainly about Bahrain. It's something that third world countries suffer from, Arab states and even GCC states. Not because the government is not doing its part as much as the people are not really aware of what to protect and how to protect it and how to claim their rights. If you are a right owner, you have to, let's say, claim your right, right, through a case or something. So I think it has a lot to do with that. When compared, I think, to regional level or to international level, I would say legislative-wise, from a legal point of view, we have the needed laws, but we still have to work on enforcement.
Right. When you look at a lot of the laws in general, whether it is within intellectual property or others, what lawyers and what lawmakers are based on are precedents always. So seeing the precedents available or that are in Bahrain, do you see in the future there being a segregated law for intellectual property by itself and not part of other legislations?
It is not part of other legislations. It's just that we do not have a code that is titled IP code. It's not something that makes protection less for us. It's just that you have to look for each code when you are looking at protecting. If you want to protect copyright, then you have a separate legislation for that.
Right.
But it is not part of the civil law.
Yeah.
It's just a separate law by itself. Do we need to have it in one set of code? I don't think that would give us any benefit. It's the laws are there, the provisions are there. It's just a misconception. Sometimes people would try to Google IP code in Bahrain and no result, basically, because there is no IP code in Bahrain. There are different laws. But this is the case in different jurisdictions. It's not an exception.
No, absolutely. But wouldn't that also help with spreading the awareness about IP law? That would be my next question. The awareness is lacking.
Right.
So would that help in spreading the awareness about it?
I don't think that would help when it comes to just having a single code as such, but there are steps to be taken in order to enhance public awareness or promote it. I think we can start at early stages, probably from schools, because everyone now deals with creativity and innovation. Like most jobs are either related in some way or another to social media or digital platforms. So it's basically it's always something to do with creativity. So more people are aware of their rights. As probably a professor, I teach students and I deal with them every day, and they represent the young generation. I see the difference. Now they know what they're doing is creative, so it needs a protection, so they ask. So I think the awareness can be achieved through different means. Probably something like the talk show that we're having today. Other social events. I get invited to talk shows, to discussion groups, to webinars. So we do have these steps. I mean, there are movements towards raising the awareness. We have the Bahraini Intellectual Property Society. It was established very recently. So they're doing great work as well. So I think I'm hopeful for now.
Hopefully. One of the things that Bahrain is very well known for is incubating or providing platforms for creative minds and for the youth and for anybody who actually has that creativity and wants to apply it to any kind of industry. So how important is it to have a cooperation with these incubators, with these companies such as Temkeen and others that come and strive to support people with this creativity?
Yes. Actually, this is exactly what they do. They have the startups and Temkeen. They have a list of probably mentors, and they try to choose those who can help with the startups or the entrepreneurs. I worked with Temkeen in several occasions just to talk about IP rights and to help those entrepreneurs know what they do, especially that most of them, they're either apps or platforms or such, so they pretty much deal with IP. So they're doing their part. I think everyone needs to do their part in order to step a bit forward, I think.
Has the change, I mean, after COVID specifically, there has been a shed of light on the immense amount of technology available at our fingertips, but it's been there also before that. But has the change of creativity, it being now digital creativity, that kind of stuff, changed the way the rules should be written or should be foreseen?
I think it's always safer to have provisions that are flexible enough to accommodate whatever change is happening, whether now or in the future. You can't really keep up with the technology. It's very difficult to keep up with the technology, and you can't really change laws on a daily basis. So the best approach would be to have a flexible kind of umbrella or titles or provisions that would accommodate the changes. For now, our provisions are good enough. However, It is always wise to revise these legislations between now and then.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to copyright with the digital platform and social media and so on. So some revision is certainly needed. I'm not saying all the provisions need to be revised, but certain provisions definitely need to be revised as well.
Definitely. Well, you being the first Bahraini academic specialized in intellectual property law, what can you tell us about your personal academic contributions to the field of intellectual property?
Yes, I was the first Bahraini academic. I graduated from Queen Mary University of London, but I was sponsored by University of Bahrain. So I came back and I started teaching IP. It's a course, 400 level course, which is designed for senior students. So teaching students, engaging in discussions about theories, the principles. I keep them busy with case law and updates and so on. So that part is you can feel the difference, like from one patch to another. You feel that whoever graduates from the course of IP, they have a different mindset when they graduate, and then some of them actually specialize in IP. So that was a good thing for me. I'm a researcher as well, so I write in IP law, especially about Bahrain and GCC in comparison to other countries, UK, EU, and then US sometimes. So I try to do my part when it comes to research and newspaper articles, Arabic, English, just to raise the public awareness.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my contribution.
Definitely. I mean, when you do these publications, there's a lot of data and statistical analysis that goes into it. And you need to have a really good amount of that data in order for it to be a valid publication. What can you tell us about collecting that data regionally in the GCC specifically?
Well, okay, we do have a problem when it comes to that part. Usually if you're doing a study that focuses on the UK or let's say European Union and so on, the legal statistics are much easier to access.
Yeah.
You have case law that is, you can tell through the number of cases what the judicial approach towards a certain matter is.
The precedents we talked about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when it comes to our part of the world, I'm not talking just about Bahrain, I'm talking about the region. The region overall, we have a problem when it comes to finding the needed data. Okay. It's because I think we probably don't have the right, legal search engine, such as what they have in other parts of the world. So that is probably, could be a difficult thing for us as researchers. However, we do take our research and studies from a comparative perspective. Okay. So we try to access whatever resources we have, and we compare it to the other jurisdictions, and we see where we stand and so on. Yeah. I've also written a textbook in Arabic about IP law, which is addressed to students, and in that work I tried to compare the provisions of Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi, and then in comparison to, let's say, UK and the judicial precedents there as well. When you do that, the student would be, or the reader would be able to identify the differences and see where you stand and what you need to do to become better, probably.
Absolutely. Also, a lot of your publications have recommendations. What are the most valid ones from your point of view that should be applied now or are being applied now?
Okay, so research papers as well as studies in general, they end with recommendations. Yeah. It is always wise to revise these recommendations when you are reviewing the legislations. Yeah. So from my point of view, I believe when it comes to copyright, certain provisions in relation to fair use need some revision, like serious revision. Things that are associated with the recent developments in the digital world and social media might be addressed in one way or another by more flexible provisions. So copyright needs some revisions at this stage, I would say. Some provisions in patent law as well. Yeah, that's for now. I think that would be needed. Yeah.
Right, definitely. When we look at international providers of services, whether they are law services like copywriting and everything, a lot of them cover an international or a global facet when it comes to copywriting a text or copywriting digital content and so on. How much information or awareness is there whether or not these international companies have any jurisdiction within Bahrain and the region?
I think there is a misconception about copyright in particular, because people will always assume that in order to have protection you need to register your work. Copyright is basically given as a right. You have a legal protection without the need to register anything.
Yes.
It's a matter of proving that you are the author. When it comes to patents and trademarks, yes, you have to register in order to obtain protection. Otherwise, you don't really have a legal right to anything. But when it comes to copyright, you don't need to register your work in order to obtain a protection. You are protected globally by the mere fact of creating the work. Right. Now, when there is a legal issue, then you have to prove that you are the creator. So people tend to try to safeguard kind of thing the rights through probably having a deposit or depositing their work somewhere, or having it mailed to them through a registered mail. It's just that you need a date to show that you were the creator of that work in that particular date. Right. These international organizations or companies or whatever, they do probably procedural work in relation to registering some rights or so on. We have a couple of them in Bahrain. Yes. So you can go through them, or you can actually do it yourself. You don't really need to have someone, exactly, a third party. You can do it yourself. So it depends, and I think a legal advice is pretty important in that stage to know exactly where to go and what to do.
Again, it always comes down to awareness and the lack of it at that point. All right. So what is the importance of research and conducting studies about intellectual properties protection, and how would they contribute to the global efforts in this regard?
Okay, I think research and studies tend to, or aim at, identifying the gap and looking at the missing link between legislation and actual practice. So many provisions are drafted in a way that could be problematic when it comes to application. So when you do the research, you might look at these kind of issues where it's not a problem yet, but it's a problem that is about to happen. And you try to identify these gaps and try to look for solutions, and end up with recommendations, as we said. So when the legislations are revised, usually they would go back and see what the specialist said about this part, and what is the opinion, the legal expert's opinion in that matter, and so on. So they might benefit from these recommendations. When you conduct research, especially when it is a comparative research, then you can tell where you stand at the national level, like we stand here today, and UK here, and France is somewhere else, and so on. So it helps you identify your current status. What do I need to benefit, or to probably enhance my position in the future. Overall, that would definitely help on a global level, because IP is an international matter. It's an international concern. It's not something that we talk about just on a local level. It's a concern for everyone around us in the world. So the more research we do, the more collaboration we have with other researchers in other parts of the world, the better I think the whole position is.
Absolutely. Towards the end now, I just want to focus on something different. We went away from, let's go away from copywriting. You also mentioned the other different types of intellectual property, one of them being concept design or product design in that matter. And these people, or these creative people, are usually part of an entity or a company where they contribute that kind of intellectual property to the company. So how are the mechanisms to protect them put into force in Bahrain, in the companies in Bahrain? Okay,
if you work, well, I think that this answer probably goes to the other aspects of IP in general. If you are working through an entity, or you work in a company and then you are a creator within that company, the law has different provisions that regulates this particular case. Let's say when it comes to copyright, the employer would own the pecuniary right, which is the money that he can make out of this work, where you maintain your author's moral rights. When it's about patents, then no, the employer would have ownership over that patent, obviously, and so on. So the law addresses these issues. It is always wise to probably approach someone with an experience in the legal field and ask what to do before you actually do it. I've noticed that recently, especially with the young people who are actually studying graphic design and web design and so on. They are more aware of their current situation and and that they're doing something creative. So they approach me and they ask, they're like, okay, I'm doing this, how can I protect it? This is not a common scenario 10 years ago.
Yeah, of course.
So it's probably, I think, what is changing the scene is the right holders themselves, the creators themselves. They know that they're doing something special and they want to protect it, so they seek protection. So that would be probably our first step into probably a stronger social awareness.
So even that needs its own set of awareness rules.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's probably the weakest point here, that the creators themselves, they're not aware of what they have and how to protect it in the future. So it is very important to focus on that kind of sector.
We hope that this show today will open or shed some light on that.
Inshallah.
Before we leave you today, from your point of view, how do you see the future of intellectual properties protection on a local level, not just in Bahrain, but in the regional and also in the international point of view?
I'm hopeful. I think things are changing for the better. Bahrain today is different than Bahrain 10 years ago. As I said, people are more aware of their rights. And the young generation, they're dealing with digital platforms and social media. They're more aware of what a trademark is, what a patent is. These concepts were not really common before. Like you would say it and no one would know what that is. It's not the case at the moment. I think social steps are being taken, as well as government initiatives. More attention is being paid to intellectual property rights. We have the Bahrain Society for IP as well. They're doing their part. I think everyone is doing their part in some way or another. If you look at the regional level, I think we don't really have a chance to stand still or to take a step backwards. Like Saudi is taking huge steps forward with the Saudi Authority of IP, as well as similar steps probably in the United Arab Emirates. So we don't really have this pleasure or luxury of just standing still. We have to move forward. So I'm hopeful, inshallah, things will be better.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thanks. And we'd like to thank you, dear viewers, for watching us, and we'll see you next week in another episode of Inside Edition.